Good evening. You're watching the news at 7:30 on ATV. I'm Edna.
And I'm Emily Sue. Here's a look at tonight's top stories.
Officials and lawmakers concerned about growing number of rowdy protests inside and outside LegCo.
Travel chief blames anti-mainland protests for declining retail sales figures.
New Ukrainian leader sworn in and gets nod of approval from Russia. Officials say they're worried that LegCo's Finance Committee won't have enough time to approve funding for key livelihood schemes before the summer holiday.
Their concerns come after dozens of protesters stormed LegCo last night to try to stop the government's controversial plan to develop the Northeast New Territories. Dozens of protesters and residents from the Northeast New Territories broke through security barriers and stormed LegCo at around 9 o'clock last night. In the middle of the chaos, some police officers and demonstrators fell over, while some were carried away. At least one security guard was injured in the mayhem and sent to hospital. The protesters were originally watching a live feed of the Finance Committee meeting outside the building. Inside, lawmakers discussed for the fifth time the government's controversial plan to destroy villages and farmland and build a new town. But they got angry when the Secretariat decided to close the first floor gates to prevent them from getting near the chamber on the second floor. In the end, the meeting was adjourned at around 9:45 p.m. with no vote. Welfare Chief Matthew Cheung is worried the protests will delay the voting of many other items already on the committee's agenda.
I think it's very important that the Finance Committee and other committees get on with the business as quickly as possible because we've got a very heavy agenda, a heavy waiting list of important livelihood issues.
Cheung stressed that he needs the committee to approve funding for the low-income family subsidy scheme before the summer holiday in July, so it can be launched by October next year.
I really appeal to Legislative Council members to speed up the process and for the sake of the grassroots families in Hong Kong.
Health Minister Ko Ming-man is also worried that funding for Queen Mary Hospital's redevelopment won't be approved on time. Ko said if the committee doesn't give the green light soon, the project could be postponed so significantly that the whole tender process may have to be reopened. Pro-establishment lawmaker Priscilla Leung, meanwhile, raised concerns about LegCo's overall security.
What has happened yesterday actually makes us see very clearly that it is very easy for all other people who can just come in and trespass the Legislative Council and then they can occupy the Legislative Council.
Leung also slammed the Secretariat's handling of the whole fiasco. She asked why they only called the police at night when the protests began at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And I urge for a clearer explanation from them, as well as urge the administrative committee to conduct a review for what is the security policy for the Legislative Council building and to review it in all aspects. I cannot accept such a protest to happen inside the Legislative Council building.
The Labour Party Sit-Ho said there are only about 100 security officers working in LegCo and around half were off-duty last night. Both Ho and the Civic Party's Claudia Mo said they understand why the Secretariat felt the need to call the police. They hope what happened yesterday won't become a precedent for future protests at LegCo.
We are quite short of manpower to deal with really the conflicting situation, so that there might be a need in certain cases that we need to call the police for help, but it should only be on the call and on the request of our Secretariat.
The footage of the blue berets swarming around the LegCo, inside the LegCo building is actually rather unsettling, if not wrong, because this is the Legislative Council building and the public security force, the police force shouldn't have been involved. So I just hope this is a one-off incident and it's not going to become a very much used precedent.
The protesters have vowed to return for Friday's Finance Committee meeting to demand the government scrap its plans to develop in the Northeast New Territories once and for all.
The number of parents whose children managed to get into the school of their choice has plunged to a 13-year low.
Once again, locals living near the border are angry that children of mainland parents are snapping up many of the school places. Bolong reports.
It's that time of the year again that parents dread, finding out whether or not their kids got into the school they wanted them to for the next academic year. While some parents were overjoyed. I'm very happy we got our first choice, said this parent. Others were extremely disappointed. This tearful mother said her child was born in Hong Kong and should have been given priority over students from across the border. This year, 29,124 children joined the central allocation system, and only 66.4%, or 19,343, managed to get into one of their top 3 school choices. The success rate is the lowest in 13 years. North District principals said the birth rate in the area has increased and the number of cross-border pupils has also gone up, which affects the chances of local students getting into their preferred school. Parents unsatisfied with the results have vowed to apply again for their first choice school. This year, around 2,600 cross-border applicants took part in the central allocation process for Primary 1. In a bid to ease overcrowding in Northern District, the government gave parents there the choice of picking schools from 8 catchment areas that provide 3,000 places. Northern District, which was the first choice for a large number of mainland parents, provided 300 places for cross-border students. But some decided to pick Tai Po District as their first choice. This mother said although it's a bit far away, it's still better than getting a place even further away, such as Wong Tai Sin. Some mainland parents complained that their children were given places in Tin Shui Wai or New Territories West. It's tough for children to travel so far every day, this parent complained. Bolong, ATV News.
The head of the Travel Industry Council has blamed protests against mainland tourists for declining retail sales figures here.
Joseph Tung said the number of visitors from across the border dropped 9% last month compared with 2013. Last week, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying suggested that the number of mainland visitors could be slashed by 20% to ease concerns of overcrowding in Hong Kong. But officials have been issuing warnings all week that there will be a price to pay if fewer mainlanders are allowed to come here. Commerce Minister Greg So warned that cutting the number of cross-border tourists will have an adverse impact on the economy. So's remark was backed by weakening retail sales figures out this week that showed a 9.8% slump in April compared to a year ago, the lowest since 2009. Sales of jewelry, watches and clocks and valuable gifts, which are mostly snapped up by mainlanders, dropped by almost 40%. Liberal Party lawmaker Vincent Fang made more grim predictions today of a further slide in retail sales figures for May. Speaking on a radio program today, Fang said he expects sales figures to remain the same for a while. However, earlier this week, Financial Services Chief Chan Kar-keung said the slowdown and sales slump was due to a decline in the mainland economy. Travel Industry Council Executive Director Joseph Tung said the string of protests against mainland tourists this year have deterred visitors from coming here. He said the number of tourists from across the border plunged 9% last month compared with last year, and he's worried the protests may have affected visitors from other countries because he says the Taiwanese, Koreans and Japanese all look similar. Tung added that the protests will make visitors feel unwelcome and they pose a threat to the travel industry. In February, mainland visitors in the shopping hub of Tsim Sha Tsui were stunned when they were confronted by about 100 demonstrators demanding that they go home. The tourists were branded locusts by the protesters, who blamed them for overcrowding in the city. HSBC economist George Leung doubts the city is capable of accommodating a large influx of mainland visitors. He criticized the government for lacking a concrete tourism policy by only encouraging business sectors to invest in local industry. The government claims that the city can cope with up to 70 million tourists annually within 3 years and 100 million over the next decade. Overseas, Ukraine's new president has been sworn into office and vowed that the country will never give up any territory that's been annexed by Russia.
Despite this, Russian President Vladimir Putin praised the new leader for trying to end the bloodshed in the east of the country. Arthur Urquiola reports.
The swearing-in of the new Ukrainian president took place in the country's parliament. Following his election win last month, Petro Poroshenko vowed to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and safeguard the rights and freedoms of the troubled country's citizens. The country has been in turmoil since Western-backed protesters overthrew the previous democratically elected government. During his inaugural speech, the new president called for peaceful dialogue and for separatists in the country to lay down their arms. He promised safe passage for Russian fighters Kiev claims have been stirring up trouble in the eastern regions. Poroshenko also insisted Ukraine would never give up Crimea, the Black Sea peninsula that switched allegiance to Moscow in March. Following meetings on the sidelines of D-Day celebrations with Poroshenko and U.S. President Barack Obama, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he hoped to see an end to violence in Ukraine soon. Kiev has been slammed by Russia for bombing its own people in separatist areas. Putin and Poroshenko met for 15 minutes to diffuse tensions between them. But according to the Russian president, the main issues of resolving the crisis were touched upon. Putin praised the Ukrainian president for his position that the bloodshed should be stopped. But Putin insisted that Kiev cease what he referred to as punitive military operations and warned that Russia would retaliate with measures to protect its economy if a pact was signed with the European Union. But he believes the outcome depends on talks between Kiev and the East, and Russia has nothing to do with the conflict. Putin also met briefly with Obama, who apparently told the Russian leader to seize the opportunity to ease tensions in Ukraine after Poroshenko's election. Arthur Urquiola, ATV News.
Still to come on ATV's main news tonight. Seattle College campus shooter bought shotgun despite being put away for mental problems.
Strikes and protests intensify in Brazil just days before World Cup kicks off.
Major sporting events from 2 continents. Tonight, live from Epsom Downs Racecourse in England. 6 exciting races from Derby Stakes Day. Then on Sunday afternoon, we take you to Tokyo Racecourse for the Yasuda Kinen. Total prize money stands at over 200 million Japanese yen. A total of 7 races in 2 days. Catch all the action live, only on ATV.
Love it? Say it. Discover the latest and the hottest trends in Japan. Feel the pulse of the vibrant and fabulous culture. JP Time TV, every Sunday night at 6:25. Search for true love, always a headache for a single lady.
And I want him to genuinely like me, even when I'm old. And that's what I want.
Stop waiting for your prince, Liz.
Juggle 2 relationships?
Done, Jack. I'm divorced.
It's not fun at all.
Whichever one I'm with, I think she's the one. How do you choose?
Ew, were you with both of them on one night?
Follow your heart. Damn you.
30 Rock, Saturday night at 10.
Hong Kong Dragon Boat Carnival. June 6th to 8th at the East Chim Sa Choi waterfront. Let's all enjoy the excitement. Please use public transport and follow police instructions.
You don't have to go to Japan, you're already there. Follow Begin Japanology into the world of Japanese culture. Experience the traditional and modern life. Reveal the pursuit of romance and perfection. Every angle presents a unique Japan. Begin Japanology, Sunday night at 8:30. Want to promote your latest products on television? ATV's 2014 Ad Easy package is the right choice for you. Our promotion reaches as far as the Pearl River Delta region and southern China, and our price starts at just $68,000. Call 2992-8890 or Call our mainland hotline now.
Health Chief Ko Wing-man says live chicken imports from the mainland could resume later this month.
But he says talks are still underway with mainland authorities on the resumption. The government imposed a 4-month ban on mainland chicken imports in February following the H7N9 bird flu scare. The suspension allowed authorities time to set up a segregation facility in Taguling, so they will be prepared for future outbreaks. Health Secretary Ko Wing-man said most of the segregation site will be ready by the middle of this month. Ko said although the site is not finished, it can still be used to store local chickens if necessary. The new facility was built to house local chickens if the Chengsha-wan wholesale market is closed to prevent the spread of bird flu. More than 20,000 birds were slaughtered in January after the discovery of the deadly H7N9 virus, and the wholesale market was closed for 3 weeks. Ko added that the government is liaising with the mainland on the resumption of chicken imports, which could resume as early as the 20th of June. On a separate issue, Ko said the government has been monitoring fresh beef prices amid concerns that it's getting too expensive. Ko said the mainland is also facing a tight supply of fresh beef and has asked authorities to look into the problem. But he added that the city has beef supplies from other countries, and live cattle from the mainland only makes up 3% of the beef supply. Lawmakers have accused the organizers of the Mega Events Fund of being messy and chaotic.
The government was also criticized for handing out money for events without checking invoices. Bolang reports.
Officials running the government's $250 million Mega Events Fund were grilled by lawmakers again this afternoon during the third hearing of LegCo's public accounts. In April, the Director of Audit blasted the Mega Events Fund for reckless spending without achieving results. This included the Dragon and Lion Dance extravaganza at the New Year's Day parade, which received $5.3 million from the fund since 2011 for the annual event. The traditional dance event was organised by a committee headed by lawmaker Chan Kam-lam of the pro-Beijing DAB. Lawmakers quizzed him about missing invoices and receipts for that particular event. Radical lawmaker Raymond Wong asked why there were no invoices for the past 3 years to show the expenses for the dance extravaganza. Wong asked how funding was approved without any invoices. Deputy Commissioner for Tourism Rosanna Law said her colleagues would randomly check invoices after events, but admitted they might not have been done thoroughly. Lawmakers also criticised the fund managers for promoting shows outside the city. Independent legislator Paul Dare pointed out that if the shows are performed elsewhere, then that would make Hong Kong a less attractive place to visit. Dare said the fund was chaotic and messy and the events were pointless. Stage director and funding recipient Ko Chi-sum disagreed with Dare, saying shows in other countries won't stop tourists from coming to Hong Kong. Bo Leung, ATV News.
Police in New York City are to begin carrying around an antidote for heroin overdoses, which have seen a spike in recent years.
And the suspect in a shooting at a college in Seattle was able to buy a shotgun despite having previously been put away for mental problems. Arthur Okuola reports.
A man suspected of killing one person and injuring 2 others in a shooting spree at a Washington State University has appeared in court in Seattle. The suspect, 26-year-old Aaron Ibarra, is being held without bail on suspicion of first-degree murder and assault. He has confessed to going on a shooting rampage on Thursday and was planning to kill as many people as he could before turning the gun on himself. Despite having been involuntarily committed in the past because of mental illness, Ibarra still managed to buy a gun.
At this time, we are still establishing the motive for this tragedy. Although we can say that Mr. Ibarra did legally obtain the shotgun several years earlier, and that's the one that he used.
Ibarra is accused of carrying out the attack at a Christian college in Seattle and was apparently stopped after a student monitor doused him with pepper spray and tackled him.
This is very easy to use. Simply remove the caps.
America's largest police force will start carrying antidotes to combat heroin overdoses in New York City, which have shot up in recent years.
Every police officer on patrol in New York City will now be able to carry a naloxone kit, putting the power to save lives in their hands. This is all it is, folks. It costs about $60, and it saves lives.
Experts are calling it an effective and safe miracle drug, but it has to be used properly and before the flow of oxygen to the brain stops.
If they get there before their respiratory depression has produced anoxia to the brain, so the brain has died or damaged, then they can administer naloxone and revive them. But if it's already an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours afterwards, it's probably too late.
Opiate overdoses claimed more than 2,000 lives in the city in 2011, more than double the number in 2004. The $1.7 million used to purchase the kits comes from the Attorney General's Community Overdose Prevention Program, which is funded by money seized from drug dealers. Houses were destroyed and a number of civilians were injured after a car bomb went off in the Libyan capital Tripoli. The explosion occurred early in the morning and was believed to have targeted the home of Hashim Bashir, the country's security chief, who was in charge of integrating former rebels into the armed forces. Security in the country has deteriorated since the Western-backed uprising of 2011 and NATO bombing campaign that helped oust late leader Muammar Gaddafi. Arthur Akila, ATV News.
Now time for sports with Raymond Young.
And more chaos in Brazil ahead of the World Cup.
Well, that's right. Strikes and protests are spoiling the party. Rubber bullets and stun grenades were fired on protesters in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo just days before the World Cup kicks off there. Brazilian television broadcast this footage that shows authorities that aren't backing down to protesters trying to make a noise before the World Cup. About a dozen military police officers approached striking workers who had taken over a Sao Paulo train station. When the picketers ignored warnings to leave, officers pointed guns, believed to be loaded with rubber bullets, at the group. Tear gas and stun grenades were then fired to disperse the crowd, as the demonstrators were driven out by the officers. The subway workers were on strike for a second straight day, after negotiations over a pay rise broke down. Half of the city's stations were forced to close, affecting millions of commuters in the Southern Hemisphere's biggest city. As a result, most had to rely on ground transport, but bus operators struggled to cope with the spike in demand, and scores of people waited impatiently at bus stations. Traffic was also brought to a complete standstill during the rush hour. The situation is worrying for Sao Paulo, which will host the opening match of the World Cup next week. Hundreds of thousands of football fans from around the world are expected to rely on public transport to get to stadiums. Unions in the past few months have used the World Cup as leverage in an attempt to force authorities to make concessions. While many locals feel the government has spent their money lavishly on the sporting event, others say the protesters are opportunists and they are getting fed up with them constantly disrupting everyone else's daily lives. To allay security fears, police in Rio have set up a unit specifically to patrol tourist hotspots, such as the iconic Copacabana beach. And the bomb squad has also stepped up training ahead of the big event, with authorities saying they're ready to handle chemical, biological, and even nuclear attacks. Mass protests took over the streets in dozens of cities during the Confederations Cup last year, and President Dilma Rousseff vowed earlier to crack down on violence and assured everyone there'll be a smooth World Cup. In other sport news, Brazil scored the only goal in a friendly match against Serbia. Even footballers tried to get their message across as Brazil hosted Serbia in their final pre-World Cup warm-up. Neymar was again the target of defenders as he attracted fouls throughout the match. With so much attention on him, his teammates were left open as Fred broke the deadlock after nearly an hour. Serbia had a golden opportunity to equalize in the 71st minute, but midfielder Milos Jojic's header was met by the post. The home side should have added a second minutes later, but Hawks' chip over the keeper was ruled offside, although replays clearly suggested otherwise. In Formula One, there was little surprise to lead the practice sessions at the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. Mercedes drivers Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg both locked up their wheels going round the corners. But the pair were still dominant. Hamilton set the fastest lap of 1 minute 16.118 seconds, with Rosberg merely 0.2 of a second behind. Four-time defending champion Sebastian Vettel was showing signs of a resurgence by finishing third. A trio of Americans lead the pack at the halfway stage of a weather-affected FedEx St. Jude Classic in Memphis. Back in business after overcoming back problems, Ben Crane charged a 7-stroke lead at 12 under 128. The four-time PGA Tour winner leads compatriots David Love III and Billy Horschel, who are both tied at 5 under. Less than half the field completed the round before thunderstorms suspended play for the second day in a row.
And a look at the weather before we go. It looks set for a wet weekend with more showers across Hong Kong today. Temperatures range from 25.2 to 30 degrees, while the relative humidity was between 73 and 95%. Winds were light to moderate coming in from the southwest. Let's check on the ultraviolet reading. The maximum recorded for the day was 5. And tomorrow's UV index will be around 8. Now for a look at the weather in the region. A trough of low pressure is affecting Guangdong and the northern part of the South China Sea. And now the satellite images. Cloud bands associated with the low pressure are covering southern China and the northern part of the South China Sea. Here's what we can expect over the next few days. Still cloudy with a few showers tomorrow. Temperatures will range between 27 and 31 degrees. More gloomy conditions over the coming week and temperatures dip to 25 degrees on Thursday. Here are the latest pollution readings under the Air Quality Health Index. General stations are at 3 to 4, meaning the health risk is low to moderate. Roadside levels are at 4 to 8, and the health risk is moderate to very high. Finally, here's the weather around the world.
That's our main news for Saturday night. We'll have an update in 1 hour. I'm Edna Zhe.
I'm Wei Mingyang.
And I'm Emily Sue. Thank you for watching ATV. Good night.
Good night.
Coming up, 144 hours journey, visa-free to Guangdong.